The night was a storm. Not the kind that passes gently over rooftops and rattles windows, but a merciless downpour that beat against the earth like punishment. The porch light flickered weakly against the rain, casting long shadows over a soldier in uniform, standing frozen with 2 children pressed against his legs. His duffel bag, still bearing the mud of distant battlefields, sat at his feet. And just above him, the door of his own home slammed shut with the finality of a coffin lid. "What if the person you trusted most," the narrator's voice pressed, sharp with tension, "the person you fought for, sacrificed for, dreamed of returning to, suddenly turned against you? What if she not only abandoned you but locked you out in the storm, while another man stood behind her, smiling?" Tonight, you'll hear the story of Daniel Miller, a soldier, a father, and a man who would discover that sometimes the most brutal battles are not fought on the front lines, but inside the walls we call home. The sound of rain drowned out almost everything, but not the small, trembling voice that rose from below. "Dad, what did we do wrong?" Ethan's words were so soft, but they cut sharper than any blade, piercing Daniel's chest as though the battlefield had followed him home. His son's eyes, wide and bewildered, searched for answers through the curtain of rain. Daniel bent down, strong arms wrapping around Ethan and Emma, pulling them close. These were the same arms that had carried wounded brothers in arms through gunfire, that had lifted stretchers across blood-soaked ground, that had dug foxholes in burning sand. Now they held only his children, their tiny shoulders trembling as if the storm might sweep them away. Behind the glass window of the door, he could still see her. Laura, the woman he had dreamed about through 4 years of deployment. The woman he had written letters to under desert skies. The woman whose photograph had been tucked inside his helmet, keeping him alive through the longest nights. But her face was a mask of cold indifference. She wasn't the Laura he remembered. She wasn't even the Laura he thought he knew. She was something else, someone else. And she wasn't alone. A figure shifted behind her, leaning casually against the doorframe. Broad shoulders, folded arms. A smirk stretched across his lips like a knife wound. Mark. His presence was a deliberate insult, his eyes brimming with contempt and triumph. He didn't need to say anything. His smile said it all. "You've already lost." Daniel's voice cracked as he tried, one last time, to pull his family back from the edge. "Laura, please. The kids are terrified. Let's just go inside and talk." He tried to steady his tone, to sound calm, rational, like the soldier who had commanded men under fire. But this wasn't a battlefield, he understood. This was his home, and he was being treated as an intruder. Laura's laugh was sharp, bitter, twisted. "Talk? I've been talking to myself for 4 years. You were never here, Daniel. Don't pretend you care now." Emma sobbed harder, clutching her father's soaked sleeve. "Mom, please let us in." Her little hands pounded weakly against the door, but Laura's eyes slid over her own children as if they were strangers. Then, with deliberate cruelty, the lock clicked. Final. Ruthless. Daniel sank to his knees on the porch, the storm washing over him, his breath catching in his chest. Through the frosted glass, he saw the flicker of a tiny red light above the door, the doorbell camera. It was recording everything. The rain, the cries of his children, the cold betrayal of a wife, and the smug grin of another man. A surge of fury burned in his veins, a fury he had learned to master on the battlefield, to chain deep inside himself where it could not destroy him. But when he looked down at the tear-streaked faces of Ethan and Emma, the rage dissolved. What use was anger here? What good would shouting do when the people behind the door had already made their choice? Words no longer mattered. He bent forward, pressing his forehead against his children's, his voice low but steady. He said nothing more than what his embrace conveyed. I will protect you. I will never leave you. Not now. Not ever. The storm howled around them, beating against the house that was no longer his, against the memories that had turned to ash. Daniel stood, gripping both children tightly, their breaths warm against his chest. He turned toward the driveway, his boots heavy with mud and heartbreak. Behind him, the door creaked open once more. A shadow moved in the glow of the porch light. Mark stepped out just far enough to watch the pickup truck pull away, water dripping from the eaves above him. The corner of his mouth curled into a slow, crooked smile. It wasn't victory, it was mockery. The kind of smile that said, "You're nothing, and you'll never get them back." The headlights of the truck disappeared into the curtain of rain, leaving the house behind like a monument to betrayal. But what neither Laura nor Mark understood was that the man they had just cast out was not broken. He was wounded, yes. Humiliated. But inside his duffel bag lay a forgotten envelope and an old iron key, his foster father's final gift. And inside that envelope waited a truth so powerful, so earth-shattering, that it would turn this storm into the beginning of a war no courtroom, no betrayal, could contain. And Daniel Miller would not lose. The rain followed them down the highway, chasing the battered pickup truck like a shadow. Inside, Daniel's hands clutched the wheel so tightly his knuckles were white, but his mind was numb. He drove on instinct, headlights carving through the darkness, wipers battling the storm. In the rearview mirror, two small faces stared back at him. Emma curled against her brother, Ethan clutching her hand, their wide eyes reflecting the passing streaks of light. They didn't cry anymore. Their silence was worse. He knew he couldn't drive forever. The gas gauge was sinking toward empty, and his children's courage was fading faster than the fuel. His chest tightened. A soldier could push past hunger, exhaustion, despair, but children couldn't. Children needed warmth, food, safety. And tonight, he had none of those to give. Finally, he turned down a deserted side road. At the end of it, an abandoned church loomed in the shadows. Its cross was broken, its windows boarded, but it was shelter. He pulled into the cracked parking lot and shut off the engine. The silence was immediate and suffocating, broken only by the patter of rain on the roof. Daniel turned in his seat, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We'll rest here for a while." His voice was hoarse, roughened by a storm far greater than the one outside. He reclined the driver's seat as far back as it would go. Emma curled up in his arms, her tiny body fitting perfectly against his chest, while Ethan tucked himself against his father's backpack, using it as a pillow. Daniel draped his old army blanket over them both. They fell asleep quickly, exhaustion stealing them away, but Daniel did not sleep. He sat in the driver's seat, eyes fixed on the dark road beyond the windshield. One arm around his daughter, the other resting on the gearshift, he listened to every sound, the distant rush of passing cars, the groan of the church in the wind, the storm's relentless voice. He stayed awake like a sentry at his final outpost, guarding the only two lives that still mattered. Cold, hunger, the bitter taste of failure gnawed at him all night. He had dreamed of this homecoming for years, dreamed of being a father again, of reading bedtime stories and teaching his son how to throw a ball. He never dreamed it would begin like this, sleeping in the cab of a truck, his children huddled against him like refugees. By dawn, the storm had passed, But the new day was no kinder. The gray light revealed the harsh reality. His children needed food, clean clothes, a place to wash. He drove to the nearest gas station, and in the dingy restroom they splashed their faces with cold water, drying themselves with thin paper towels. With the last handful of coins in his pocket, Daniel bought a carton of milk and 2 sweet rolls. He divided them carefully, giving each child a share and keeping nothing for himself. They ate quietly, not asking for more, their small mouths chewing slowly as though even they knew how little there was. Watching them broke him in a way the battlefield never could. He swallowed hard and reached for his phone. There was a number he had promised himself he would never dial, not under these circumstances. But pride could not feed children. Pride could not shield them from hunger. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and pressed the call. "Vince, it's me." There was silence on the other end. Then a familiar voice, rough but steady. "Dan, where the hell are you? I heard you were back." Daniel hesitated, words catching in his throat. I need help. Not money. Just a job. Anything." 15 minutes later, a truck pulled up beside him in the parking lot. Vincent Morales stepped out, a fellow soldier, a brother in arms. One look at Daniel, at the 2 damp children huddled in the cab, and his expression hardened into fury at the unseen betrayal. "Jesus, Dan," Vince muttered, shoving a wad of bills into his hand before he could protest. "Don't give me that pride nonsense. Get a motel. Get them warm. I'll find you work tomorrow. This isn't charity. This is brotherhood." Daniel tried to argue, but Vince cut him off with the same iron tone he had used on the battlefield. "Take it. Now." That night, for the first time in 24 hours, his children slept in real beds. The motel room smelled of bleach and cheap soap, but to Emma and Ethan, it was heaven. Warm water from the shower washed away the grime, and their small bodies relaxed under clean blankets. Daniel sat at the edge of their beds, watching their faces soften as sleep claimed them. It was the first flicker of life he had seen return to them since the storm. The days that followed were a blur of survival. Vincent found him work at a warehouse, hauling freight, back-breaking shifts that left his muscles screaming, but it paid in cash. At the end of each day, he returned to the motel with sore hands and an aching back, but his children had food in their stomachs, and that was all that mattered. Finding child-care was harder. One daycare turned him away flat, no vacancies. Another eyed his grimy work clothes with disdain, demanding documents he didn't have. A third asked for a registration fee he couldn't cover. But finally, in a worn-down neighborhood, he found an elderly woman who ran a small daycare out of her home. The toys were old, the walls faded, but kindness shone in her eyes. She agreed to watch them by the hour for a price he could just barely manage. A week later, Daniel scraped together enough for a deposit on a basement apartment in a run-down complex. The walls reeked of mildew, the floors were cracked, but it was theirs. No beds, no furniture, but theirs. He pawned his watch, the one engraved with the words "Courage is grace under pressure." He took the $100, bought 2 foam mattresses, milk, pasta, and the bare essentials. Life became brutal. Warehouse shifts by day, parenting by night. He slept on the floor while his children slept on the mattresses. But he made rituals for them, fragile shields against the chaos. Dinner was always pasta, but he called it superhero spaghetti. At night, he gathered them close, whispering, "Daddy's here. Emma is safe. Ethan is safe." One night, Ethan jolted awake from a nightmare, wetting the bed in panic. Daniel cleaned it quietly, soothing his son until he drifted back to sleep. Only then did he step into the tiny bathroom, turning the faucet on full blast so no one could hear. He sank to the floor, gripping his head, silent sobs racking his body. No tears came, only the shuddering release of a man carrying more than he could bear. But when he emerged, he smiled again. His children would not see his despair. They would only see their father, unbroken, standing between them and the storm. Yet the storm was far from over. One evening, after another grueling shift, he came home to find a notice slipped under the door, next month's rent. His earnings barely covered food and daycare. The numbers didn't add up. He stared at the paper, then at the nearly empty refrigerator. He couldn't go on like this. His eyes drifted to the old military trunk in the corner. Inside, beneath faded uniforms, lay the rain-soaked envelope and the iron key, his foster father's final gift. He had dismissed them before, too consumed by survival. But now, with his children's future hanging by a thread, the weight of that legacy pressed on him like destiny itself. He sat in silence, the envelope trembling in his hands. He didn't yet know what it contained. But he knew one thing. This moment of despair was exactly what his father had meant. When you feel truly powerless, that's when you must turn to it. And Daniel was powerless no longer. The decision was made. Tomorrow he would open it, and what he found inside would change everything. Morning light slipped weakly through the narrow basement window, brushing against the damp concrete walls. Daniel sat at the table, his children still asleep on their foam mattresses, their breathing soft and steady. In front of him lay the envelope, its edges still wrinkled and stained from that night's storm. He had avoided it for days, afraid of what it might mean, afraid of hope itself. But the rent notice still lay on the counter, the refrigerator was nearly empty, and his pride was no longer enough to shield his children. With steady hands, he broke the seal. Inside was a single iron key, cold and heavy, and a note written in his foster father's familiar hand. The ink was faded, blurred at the edges, but the words cut sharp. Money is a good servant, but a terrible master. Only when you understand the worth of what money cannot buy will you be worthy. You'll know when it's time to use this. Daniel sat back, his chest rising and falling. The weight of the key pressed into his palm as though it carried not just metal but destiny. He didn't know what it opened, but he knew where it belonged. The words etched in his father's voice lingered in his mind. You'll know when it's time. That afternoon, after dropping Emma and Ethan at daycare, he drove into the city. The old marble facade of the National Bank towered above him, its columns grand and imposing. Inside, the cool air and polished floors contrasted sharply with his worn boots and work shirt. He felt out of place, like a soldier wandering into an empire not his own. At the counter, he slid the key forward along with his ID. The teller's expression shifted from suspicion to something close to reverence. After a quick check of the system, she summoned a senior employee, who escorted Daniel past layers of security, through massive steel doors, into the silent heart of the vault. The man placed a long, gleaming deposit box on the table and then stepped out, leaving Daniel alone. His heartbeat echoed in his ears as he drew the box closer. He slid the lid open slowly, bracing for disappointment, bracing for anything. Inside, there was no pile of cash, no gold bars. Instead, neatly stacked folders, stock certificates stamped with the name Apex Dynamics, a copy of a will, and at the very bottom, a thick envelope sealed with red wax. His name, Daniel, was written across it. Hands trembling, he broke the seal. The letter inside carried the voice of the man who had raised him, his father in every way that mattered. It began with memories of a past Daniel never fully knew, how he and a partner had once built a small company in a shabby garage, how disagreements drove him to walk away but not before securing a large block of shares. He had chosen a quieter life, raising Daniel, rather than chasing fortune. Daniel's breath caught as he reached the line that changed everything. "I never sold a single share, son. Apex Dynamics has grown into a giant. As of the latest valuation, these shares are worth approximately $100 million. The letter slipped from his hands, the vault spinning around him. 100 million. The number didn't belong to his world, the world of cement floors, foam mattresses, and pasta dinners. 4 years, survival had meant stretching every dollar, counting coins at a gas station for milk. And now, in a single moment, he was holding a legacy vast enough to change not only his children's lives but his own. But as his chest heaved, his eyes caught the next lines. "Don't let that number blind you. I wanted you to grow up knowing the value of work, of self-respect. I wanted you to become a good man, not a spoiled heir. And you have, soldier. I am proud of you. But remember, this wealth is not a sword. It is a shield. Prove first that you are the father your children deserve. Then prove you are a worthy heir." Daniel closed his eyes, the letter clutched in his fists. He didn't feel triumph. He felt the weight of responsibility. This wasn't an escape. This wasn't a miracle. It was a test. A weapon that could save his children, or destroy everything if misused. When he finally stepped out of the vault, the world felt different. The same traffic rushed past, the same sun hung in the sky, but he no longer walked as just a warehouse worker or even as a broken soldier. He carried a secret powerful enough to shatter the illusions of those who had betrayed him. Yet he made a choice. He wouldn't use it to crush Laura. He wouldn't use it to boast. This wasn't about revenge. This was about Emma and Ethan. Their safety. Their happiness. That evening, he met with Vincent at a quiet diner. The moment he sat down, Vincent leaned across the table, eyes burning with curiosity. "Dan, you've got that look. What's going on?" Daniel slid the letter across the table. Vincent's eyes scanned the lines, his jaw tightening, his gaze flicking up in shock. "Dan, do you know what this means?" Daniel nodded slowly. "Yeah. It means I've got no excuses anymore." The next step was a lawyer. Vincent introduced him to David Parker, a seasoned attorney with sharp eyes and a calm voice. In Parker's office, Daniel laid out the situation, the betrayal, the children, the fight ahead. "Finally," he admitted, "I have the financial means to see this through." Parker's eyebrow arched. "Financial means?" "With a job at the docks." Daniel leaned forward, voice steady. "It's a long story. But I don't want this case to be about money. If it comes out, it'll turn into a feeding frenzy. I want to win as a father, on the strength of what I do for my kids every day. The inheritance is only a shield, not a sword." For the first time, a flicker of respect crossed Parker's face. "That's a smart strategy. We'll build your case on devotion, stability, truth. And we'll keep your ace hidden until the moment it's needed." As Daniel walked out of the lawyer's office into the rush of city streets, his phone buzzed. A message from Vincent lit up the screen. "Be careful. Word is Mark's been snooping around. Looks like he suspects something." Daniel's eyes hardened, steel flashing within them. Mark had no idea what he was about to face. He thought Daniel was just a broken soldier, scraping by. He had no idea Daniel now carried a weapon far greater than anything Mark could imagine. But Daniel wasn't just planning to fight. He was preparing for war. The children's laughter was his anchor, their innocence his reason. And now, for the first time since that storm, Daniel felt the ground firm beneath his feet. He had been cast out into the night with nothing. But in the shadows he had found not just survival, but power. And though he had sworn never to wield it in anger, there was no denying it. Sooner or later he would have to raise the shield. Because the storm wasn't over. It was only gathering strength. The night was quiet inside Daniel's small apartment, but his mind was anything but. Papers were spread across the dining table. Expense notebooks, daycare receipts, even photos of bruises on Emma's arm from when she stumbled on the playground. Evidence. Proof. He had to be prepared for whatever came next. Because he knew Mark. And men like Mark didn't just win battles, they played dirty. The knock came when he least expected it. A sharp rap against the door, urgent, official. Daniel opened it to find a man in a uniform holding a thick envelope. "Daniel Miller? That's me. You've been served." Daniel's hand, calloused from long days at the warehouse, took the papers. As the man walked away, Daniel closed the door and unfolded the stack under the harsh glow of the kitchen light. The words inside made his stomach churn. It wasn't just a custody petition. It was an attack, a character assassination. The document painted him as a psychologically unstable veteran suffering from violent outbursts. It called his warehouse job menial, unreliable labor. It described his modest basement apartment as unsafe, unfit for children. Every word twisted, exaggerated, designed to paint him as a danger. And at the bottom was Laura's name, signed in ink. His chest tightened, but he knew whose voice echoed in those words. Not hers. Mark's. The next morning, he sat across from David Parker in the lawyer's office, the file open between them. Parker leaned back, eyes sharp. "This isn't a custody petition. This is a smear campaign. They're pushing for an emergency order. If the judge believes even a fraction of this, you could lose your kids in a heartbeat." Daniel's jaw clenched. "So what do we do?" Parker tapped the table. "We fight. With truth. You've documented everything. Your expenses, your routines, your rent. That's your ammunition. But we'll need more. Teachers. Neighbors. Anyone who's seen you with your kids. And if there's any evidence that undermines their credibility, we use it." Daniel hesitated, then remembered something. The flicker of red from the doorbell camera the night he was cast out. His voice was hoarse. "There's video. The night she threw us out. It was all recorded." Parker's head snapped up, eyes blazing. "If we can get that footage, it changes everything. That's not just evidence, that's a dagger straight through their lies." From that moment, Daniel was no longer just defending himself. He was building a case, piece by piece, like a soldier fortifying a position before battle. He spoke to Mrs. Martha, the elderly neighbor who had lived across the street for years. She remembered the storm, remembered hearing the children crying on the porch. She agreed to testify. The preschool teacher remembered Emma wetting herself during nap time after the upheaval, Ethan growing unusually quiet. She provided a written statement. Vincent dug into Mark's past, uncovering gambling debts, shady dealings, even aliases he'd used to slip away from casinos. Slowly, carefully, Daniel and his small circle of allies wove a net of truth strong enough to hold against lies. But Mark wasn't done. One night, just as Daniel tucked Emma and Ethan into bed after a story, the phone rang. Laura's number flashed on the screen. Against his better judgment, he answered. Her voice was honeyed, false. Daniel, for the kid's sake, just withdraw your petition. Step back. Daniel's eyes shifted to the bunk bed, where his children lay curled together, eyes heavy with sleep. His reply was sharp as steel. Because of them, I won't take a single step back. He hung up, thinking it was a warning. He didn't realize it was bait. 30 minutes later, pounding shook the door. Daniel peered through the peephole and saw a middle-aged woman flanked by a police officer. His gut clenched. Mr. Miller? Her tone was firm, her badge glinting under the hall light. I'm Susan Hayes from Child Protective Services. We received a report of a violent outburst at this residence. A trap. Daniel drew in a slow breath, steadying his heartbeat. Years of discipline took over. He opened the door calmly. Come in. My children are asleep. Please walk quietly. Inside, the woman's trained eyes scanned the apartment. She saw a modest home, worn furniture, mismatched chairs, a rickety table, but clean. She asked to see the children. Daniel led her to the bedroom, opening the door a crack. Under the soft glow of a star-shaped nightlight, Emma and Ethan lay soundly asleep, curled close together on their bunk bed. Susan Hayes watched for a long moment, then closed her notebook. Her tone softened, almost against her will. Mr. Miller, raising 2 children alone isn't easy. Are you under a lot of stress? Daniel answered carefully. It's a challenge, but it's an honor. She scribbled notes, her face unreadable. When she left, Daniel leaned back against the door, exhaling a long, shaky breath. He understood the move now. Mark didn't need to prove him violent. He just needed to plant doubt. Poverty. Stress. A gray picture could be enough for a judge to take everything away. The following days stretched like a prison sentence. Daniel poured his strength into his children, pretending everything was normal. They played at the park, shared ice cream, laughed at bedtime stories. But the notice came anyway, a temporary order. The kids would be placed with their mother until the hearing. On Sunday night, Ethan clung to him. Can't we stay, Dad? His small voice trembled. Daniel forced a smile. Do you miss Mom? I do, Emma whispered, clutching her teddy bear. But I don't like Uncle Mark. He looks at me funny. Daniel's heart shattered. He pulled them close, kissing their heads. Remember what I told you. Be strong. Take care of each other. I'll come for you. I promise. The next morning, he watched them walk out with a social worker, backpacks small against their shoulders. They kept looking back, eyes wide with fear, until the car door shut. The silence that filled the apartment after they left was unbearable. Daniel sat on the couch, head in his hands. He had fought, done everything right, and still lost. He held an inheritance vast enough to change fate, yet his children were gone. His father's words echoed, "Money is a good servant, but a terrible master." What was he teaching them if he used wealth as a weapon? That everything, even love, even justice, could be bought? No. He couldn't. He wouldn't. Hours passed. The apartment was silent, haunted. Then his eyes fell on the toy lying by the table leg, a cheap plastic giraffe with a broken leg, the one Ethan had tried to fix. Daniel picked it up, staring at it in his palm. Broken. Discarded. But not hopeless. A quiet fire sparked inside him. He would not sit in despair. He would repair. Rebuild. Prepare for the next battle. He dialed Parker. His voice was no longer desperate, but steady. We lost a battle, not the war. Tell me what we need to do next. I'm ready. In his hand, the little giraffe felt like more than a toy. It felt like a promise. The war for his children was only beginning. The courthouse was alive with tension, its marble halls echoing with footsteps, whispered voices, and the faint hum of fluorescent lights. Daniel walked slowly, his shoulders squared, his uniform pressed though modest. He wasn't dressed in military gear, but he carried himself like a soldier marching into battle. On either side of him, his children walked hand in hand with a social worker, their small faces pale, eyes darting nervously. Every step they took seemed heavier than the last. Laura and Mark were already seated inside, but their composure had cracked. Mark shifted constantly, his restless leg bouncing under the table, his jaw tight with unspoken panic. Laura sat rigid, her once perfect appearance dulled, her eyes hollow. The glittering world she had chosen was crumbling, and deep down, she knew it. The judge entered, stern and steady, and the courtroom hushed. Attorney Graves, representing Laura, began with the same venom as before. He painted Daniel as unstable, unfit, a soldier too scarred by war to raise children safely. He waved papers, photographs of Daniel's small apartment, exaggerated details of financial strain, all designed to twist reality into a weapon. But this time, Daniel didn't flinch. He didn't shrink under their accusations. He sat tall, his eyes steady, his hands folded calmly in front of him. Then Parker stood, his voice sharp as steel. Your Honor, what we are hearing is not truth, but a carefully crafted performance. It is time we lay down the facts. One by one, he revealed the evidence. The teacher's report documenting the children's decline after leaving their father's care. Mrs. Martha's journal, meticulously recording nights when the children were left alone. The testimony of a child psychologist, who concluded Emma and Ethan were developing anxiety, fear, and insecurity under Laura and Mark's roof. The courtroom shifted, whispers rising. Parker let the words hang in the air before pressing forward. And finally, Your Honor, a piece of evidence that speaks louder than any testimony. A recording from the night these children were cast out. The lights dimmed slightly as the footage played on a monitor. Gasps rippled through the room as the scene unfolded. Laura shoving a suitcase onto the porch, the twins crying in the rain, begging to be let inside, and Mark standing behind her with his arms crossed, smirking. Every detail was there. Every moment of cruelty. Laura's face drained of color. Mark's fists tightened on the table. But Daniel didn't move. He simply lowered his head, gripping his children's small hands. The truth was finally speaking for itself. And Parker wasn't finished. He dropped the final blow with calm precision. Your Honor, we also submit documented evidence of Mr. Mark Peterson's gambling debts, fraudulent aliases, and an active warrant for his arrest in Nevada. Two plainclothes officers stepped forward from the back of the courtroom. Mark turned, eyes wide, as recognition flashed across his face. Beads of sweat broke across his forehead. He muttered something under his breath, but there was no escape. The officers stood behind him, silent and ready. Laura's head whipped toward him, her eyes wild with disbelief. Mark, is this true? Her voice cracked, desperate. Mark didn't answer. He stared at the floor, his silence sealing his guilt. Parker struck again. And while Mr. Peterson was gambling away properties, Daniel Miller was securing a safe, stable home for his children. Paid in full. No debts. A true place of security. Your Honor, the contrast could not be clearer. One parent chose deception and neglect. The other chose sacrifice, devotion, and truth. The judge sat back, her gaze sweeping across the courtroom. She requested a private session with the children. Minutes later, she returned, her face solemn. Her gavel struck once, echoing like thunder. This court awards full custody of Emma and Ethan Miller to their father, Daniel Miller. Furthermore, Mr. Mark Peterson is to be taken into custody immediately. This court is adjourned. The room erupted. Laura's shoulders slumped, her face a mask of shock and regret as the officers closed in on Mark, pulling his hands behind his back. His defiance crumbled, his smirk gone, replaced with the hollow look of a man who had finally lost everything. Daniel didn't look at them. His focus was only on the two children rushing toward him. Emma's tears streamed down her cheeks as she cried, "Daddy!" Ethan clung to his leg, burying his face against him. Daniel knelt, gathering them both in his arms, holding them as though he would never let go again. His voice cracked as he whispered into their hair, "We're going home. We're finally going home." Outside the courthouse, sunlight broke through the clouds, pouring down onto the steps like a blessing. Vincent stood by the old pickup, his eyes soft with relief. Daniel walked slowly, his children pressed close, the weight of months of struggle finally lifting from his shoulders. In the rearview mirror, as the truck pulled away, Daniel caught a glimpse of Laura standing alone on the courthouse steps. Her eyes followed them, filled with emptiness, regret, and the faintest glimmer of longing. She had once held everything, and she had lost it all. Weeks later, the sound of laughter filled a quiet neighborhood. Daniel stood in the backyard of a modest house with a white picket fence, pushing his children on a swing tied to the sturdy branch of an old oak tree. Their joy echoed across the yard, pure and free. Inside the house, meals were simple but shared together. Mornings began with pancakes shaped into smiley faces. Nights ended with bedtime stories read under soft lamps. Slowly, the scars of the storm began to heal. But redemption has many faces. Months later, a taxi stopped at the end of the street. Laura stepped out, dressed plainly, her face thinner but gentler. She didn't rush forward. She simply stood, watching from a distance. Daniel saw her, his heart tightening, but he didn't move to stop her. He knelt beside Emma and Ethan, whispering softly, "Mom's here to visit." The children looked uncertain but then ran forward. Laura knelt, tears in her eyes as they hugged her, brief, hesitant, but real. It was the first stone laid on a long, painful road to redemption. Later that evening, Ethan asked his father, "Dad, why did you let Mom see us?" Daniel pulled his children close, his voice low and steady. "Because anyone can make mistakes. But what matters most isn't never falling. It's learning how to get back up. Love, even when it's broken, is still stronger than anger." The golden leaves of autumn drifted down from the oak tree as Daniel looked at his children resting their heads against his shoulders. He felt complete. He had fought with dignity, with truth, with love. He had held $100 million in his hands, but had chosen the harder road. And in the end, he had won something no amount of money could ever buy: the trust, love, and future of his children. And perhaps that was the greatest inheritance of all.